The metallic doors of the elevator slid shut, sealing me inside with a cardboard box that contained the accumulated remains of my 5 years of service. I stood there, holding the heavy box against my chest, listening to the quiet hum of the descent. My name is Gavin Jenkins, and at 54 years of age, I had spent the last half-decade working 80-hour weeks as the Chief Strategy Officer of Synex Analytics. The company was on the brink of collapse when I arrived, but through relentless effort, I had saved it. Today was supposed to be the signing day of a $4 billion merger with Apex Capital. Instead, I was holding my personal belongings, escorted out of the building. As the elevator descended, my phone began to vibrate. The screen illuminated with the name of Nolan Brooks, the managing partner of Apex Capital. I took a deep breath, trying to steady the tremor in my chest, and pressed the talk button. "Gavin, where are you?" Nolan's voice boomed, filled with excitement. "We are all gathered in the main lobby, and the board is waiting. The press is outside, and we are ready to make history today. Where is our chief negotiator?" "There has been a change of plans, Nolan," I said, keeping my voice flat. "I am no longer with Synex Analytics. I have been terminated, effective immediately." There was a long, heavy silence on the line. "Gavin, what are you talking about?" Nolan asked, his tone shifting from jovial to deeply concerned. "Is this some kind of last-minute negotiation tactic? Because if it is highly unusual." "No tactic, Nolan," I replied. "It is simply the reality. I suggest you speak with Oliver Vance or the company's representatives about how they wish to proceed." The elevator chimed and the doors opened into the lobby. Through the glass, I could see Nolan standing near the reception desk. Phone pressed to his ear, his brow furrowed in confusion. A few yards behind him stood Chloe Vance, the 25-year-old daughter of our chief executive officer. She was clutching the newly revised employee handbook like a shield, a smug expression on her face. Chloe had been appointed as the vice president of corporate administration only 2 weeks ago, a pure act of nepotism by her father, Oliver. She had immediately set out to assert her authority by enforcing trivial rules, eager to prove she could control the veterans of the firm. I walked out of the elevator, holding my box. Nolan spotted me immediately. His eyes widened, and he quickly ended the call, striding across the lobby toward me. "Gavin," he said, looking at the cardboard box in my hands. "What is the meaning of this?" He reached out and wrapped me in a brief, firm hug, a gesture of respect from a man who had sat across from me at the negotiating table for 6 months. "Are we ready to sign the merger?" I took a steady breath, making sure my voice carried across the lobby. "Afraid not, Nolan," I said. "Chloe Vance just terminated my employment. The deal is off." Nolan's expression froze. The warmth vanished from his face, replaced by a cold, hard mask. He slowly turned his head to look at Chloe, who had marched over, her heels clicking loudly on the marble floor. "You did what?" Nolan asked, his voice dropping to a whisper. Chloe, oblivious to the gravity of the situation, raised her chin. "I was simply enforcing company policy," she stammered, pointing at the handbook in her hand. "Mr. Jenkins arrived today violating Section 12 of our professional dress code. He is wearing a dark navy polo shirt instead of a white button-down, and he refused to wear a necktie on a formal signing day. It is a clear violation, and we must maintain standards." Nolan stared at her in disbelief. The entire Apex Capital investment team stood behind him in stunned silence. "You fired the lead negotiator of a $4 billion merger, the man who spent 5 years keeping this company afloat, because he chose to wear a navy polo shirt instead of a necktie?" Nolan asked, his voice dripping with icy anger. Before Chloe could reply, Oliver Vance came rushing out of the executive elevator, his face pale. Several board members followed him, their faces filled with anxiety. "Nolan, please," Oliver gasped. "I am sure we can sort this out. Gavin is an invaluable asset." This is clearly a misunderstanding, a minor communication breakdown. But Nolan had already turned his back on Oliver, huddled in a hushed conversation with his chief legal counsel. Oliver approached me, lowering his voice to a desperate whisper. "Gavin, please, let us go upstairs and discuss this in my office. Chloe is young. She was just overzealous. We can rectify this." "There is nothing to rectify, Oliver," I replied. "Your daughter made a decision, and you supported it by your silence." "I accept my firing." Nolan turned back to face us. "Our agreement was with Gavin Jenkins," he said. "Gavin structured this entire deal. Without him, we have no confidence in the management of this company. I am sorry, Oliver, but Apex Capital is withdrawing from the merger. Actually, we can, Nolan's attorney spoke up, stepping forward. Page 17. Section 4 of our agreement contains a key person clause. Gavin Jenkins is specifically named. If he leaves the company prior to closing for any reason other than illness or death, Apex Capital retains the right to withdraw from the transaction without penalty. Oliver turned to his legal team, his eyes pleading. The head of our legal department looked down. Yes, Oliver. Gavin wrote that clause himself. He is the only one who realized its significance during the review. Nolan extended his hand to me. Gavin, when you decide what your next venture is, give me a call. Talent like yours is rare. He turned and walked out of the lobby, followed by his team. I nodded once to my former colleagues, turned, and walked out the glass doors, leaving behind a silent lobby and a collapsing company. Outside, the morning air felt surprisingly light. The weight of Synex Analytics had been lifted from my shoulders, even if it was done in the most humiliating way possible. I walked to the parking garage, placed my box in the trunk of my car, and turned off my mobile phone. For 5 years, I had been at the beck and call of the board, working through holidays and answering emails at 3 in the morning. Now there was only silence. I drove home, made a fresh pot of coffee, and sat on my balcony, watching the city wake up. It was the first time in years that I had actually observed the sunrise without Cutsidates, without calculating revenue projections. By that afternoon, the news of the collapsed merger began to hit the financial markets. Synex Analytics stock plummeted 28% in a matter of hours as rumors spread that Apex Capital had walked away from the deal. Financial analysts were calling it one of the most disastrous corporate self-sabotages in recent history. The company, which had been valued at over $1 billion prior to the merger announcement, was suddenly in a free fall. By the time the markets closed the following day, the stock had dropped an additional 12%, wiping out hundreds of millions of dollars in shareholder value. I spent the next week ignoring the chaos. I left my phone off, only turning it on once a day to check for messages from my sister, Clara Jenkins. When we finally spoke on a video call, she stared at me in surprise. I have not seen you this relaxed since you took that job, Clara said, shaking her head. You look 5 years younger, Gavin. I suppose getting fired was a blessing in disguise. It certainly feels that way, I admitted, leaning back in my chair. But the sheer absurdity of it still amazes me. I spent 5 years of my life sacrificing my health, my personal relationships, and my sleep to build that merger. And Oliver Vance let his daughter destroy all of it in 5 minutes over a navy polo shirt. Clara sighed. That is because they did not value you, Gavin. They valued the work you did, but they thought you were replaceable. They thought the corporate hierarchy would protect them from their own stupidity. Now they are learning otherwise. During the second week, I spent my days walking in the local nature reserve, breathing in the fresh air, and reacquainting myself with a world outside of spreadsheets. I read books that had sat on my shelf, gathering dust for years. I cooked actual meals, enjoying the process of chopping vegetables and seasoning sauces rather than ordering greasy takeout at midnight to eat at my corporate desk. My sleep improved, and the constant tension in my jaw began to fade. The corporation was burning, but I was finally living. The financial news grew grimmer by the day. Shareholders were furious, demanding the immediate resignation of the entire board. Several major institutional investors filed lawsuits, claiming breach of fiduciary duty by the board of directors for allowing a critical officer to be terminated on signing day without a succession plan. The company's credit rating was downgraded to junk status, and suppliers began demanding advance payments. 2 weeks after my termination, Oliver Vance finally managed to reach me. He called from a blocked number, knowing I was screening his calls. When I answered, his voice sounded cracked and hollow, the voice of a man who had not slept in weeks. Gavin, he said, almost pleading, please do not hang up. We need to talk. I am listening, Oliver, I replied, keeping my voice calm and even. The board wants to meet with you, Oliver said, his voice trembling slightly. The situation here is far worse than we anticipated. The stock has fallen 62% since you left. Our major clients are beginning to pull their accounts because they do not trust the new management. We need your help to stabilize the company and bring Apex Capital back to the negotiating table. To do what exactly? I asked. To fix the mess your daughter created. The same daughter you stood by while she escorted me out of the building. Oliver let out a heavy sigh that was thick with regret. That was a catastrophic mistake, Gavin. Chloe has been removed from her executive role and reassigned to a junior position in the research department where she cannot make policy decisions. I have been formally reprimanded by the board. Please, Gavin. Thousands of employee jobs are at stake. The people you worked with for 5 years, the ones who respect you, they are going to lose everything if we file for bankruptcy. I felt a slight pang of guilt for the regular employees, the developers and analysts who had worked alongside me. But I also remembered the silence in that lobby when Chloe Vance fired me. Not a single board member or executive had stood up for me. What is the board's proposal? I asked, refusing to let my emotions dictate my response. Come to the boardroom tomorrow morning, Oliver said, hope creeping into his voice. Name your terms. We will agree to whatever is reasonable to save SynXX Analytics. I will meet with the board, I said after a brief pause. But we will meet today, not tomorrow, and I will bring the terms. You will either sign them or you can watch the company dissolve. I ended the call before he could reply and dialed my attorney. It was time to draft a new kind of contract. 4 hours later, I walked back into the headquarters of SynX Analytics. I wore the exact same navy polo shirt that had triggered my termination 2 weeks prior. Walking through the lobby, I noticed the tense atmosphere. Employees whispered as I passed, and the receptionist watched me with wide eyes. When I entered the boardroom, the board members stood up immediately. Their faces were a mix of desperation and embarrassment. Oliver Vance looked exhausted, his suit rumpled and his eyes bloodshot. Chloe Vance was nowhere to be seen. Thank you for coming, Gavin, the chairman of the board, Lawrence Finch, said, gesturing to a seat at the head of the table. We appreciate your willingness to discuss a resolution. Let us skip the corporate pleasantries. Lawrence, I said, remaining standing. In the 2 weeks since my departure, your market capitalization has shrunk by over half. You have lost 62% of your share value. 3 of your top 5 clients have terminated their contracts, and the press is predicting bankruptcy within the month. You are on the verge of ruin. Oliver Vance nodded slowly, his head in his hands. We know the numbers, Gavin. We know how bad it is. You lost the Apex Capital merger, which was your only path to long-term survival, I continued, placing a manila folder on the table. Even if I can convince Nolan Brooks to return to the table, and that is a significant assumption, the terms will be far less favorable to SynX Analytics. We will be operating from a position of extreme weakness. We understand, Lawrence Finch said. What are your terms for reinstatement? I pushed the folder toward him. These terms are entirely non-negotiable. If you change a single word, I walk out and you can manage the bankruptcy filing yourselves. Lawrence opened the folder and the other board members leaned in to read the 3-page document my attorney had drafted. As they read, their expressions turned from desperation to shock. Oliver's face went completely pale. This is unprecedented, one of the older board members protested, looking up at me. You are asking for a complete restructuring of your compensation and authority. The document was clear. It demanded my immediate reinstatement as Chief Strategy Officer, with a salary triple my previous rate. It also guaranteed me a seat on the board of directors, complete autonomy over corporate strategy, without requiring board approval for decisions under $10 million, and a substantial equity stake representing 15% of the company's common stock. Furthermore, it required a public statement from the company acknowledging that my termination was a mistake and apologizing for the error. But the clause that caused the most concern was Section 9, which dealt with new business ventures. It stated that any new business initiative, product line, or spin-off company I developed while employed at SynX Analytics would remain 60% my personal property. SynX Analytics would receive 40% ownership but would have no voting control over the venture. This new venture clause is highly unusual, Lawrence Finch said, looking at me over his glasses. Typically, any intellectual property created by an employee belongs entirely to the corporation. This is standard practice in every corporate employment agreement. Lawrence Finch argued, looking around the room for support. The company provides the resources, the office space, and the salary, so the company owns the output. If we allow you to keep 60% ownership, it creates a dangerous precedent that could upset our entire corporate structure. I am aware of standard Delaware corporate governance practices, Lawrence, I countered, looking him dead in the eye. But standard practices did not prevent this board from allowing a novice vice president to derail our survival strategy. If you want a standard chief strategy officer, you can hire one of the many applicants currently sending resumes to your human resources department. But none of them will be able to bring Nolan Brooks back to the table. I am offering a unique solution, and this clause is the price of that solution. You have exactly 5 minutes to decide before I take my folder and leave. So is firing your chief strategy officer over a navy polo shirt on the day of a $4 billion merger signing, I replied, my voice calm but sharp as steel. Consider this clause my insurance policy against future administrative interference. If you want my strategic mind to save this company, you must accept that my creations belong to me. The board members looked at each other, engaged in a silent conversation of glances and nods. They knew they had no choice. Without me, the stock would open even lower the next morning, and the creditors would begin liquidating their assets within weeks. Finally, Lawrence Finch reached for his pen. He signed the document and passed it to the next board member. One by one, they added their signatures. Oliver Vance was the last to sign, his hand shaking slightly as he wrote his name. "When can you begin?" Lawrence asked, handing the signed contract back to me. "I have already begun," I said, taking my seat at the table. "I will be in my old office making calls to Apex Capital. I suggest the rest of you begin drafting the public apology." That evening, I called Nolan Brooks. The conversation lasted for over 2 hours. Nolan was extremely resistant to returning to the table, citing the unstable leadership at Synex Analytics. I had to use every ounce of leverage I possessed, promising him that I now held a board seat and complete strategic control over the company's operations. Eventually, he agreed to resume negotiations, but only under revised terms that reduced the valuation of Synex Analytics by 20%, shifting more power to Apex Capital. It was a harsh deal for our shareholders, but it was the only way to keep the company alive. I had delivered on my first promise. With the merger negotiations back on track, I turned my attention to stabilizing the internal operations of Synex Analytics. The company had been fractured by the sudden crisis, and morale was at an all-time low. I spent the next 3 months restructuring departments, eliminating redundant administrative positions, and ensuring that our core analysts were protected from executive meddling. During this time, I occasionally saw Chloe Vance in the building. She was working in a quiet corner of the research department, keeping her head down and avoiding eye contact with anyone. I never spoke to her, nor did I acknowledge her presence. Her actions had set this chain of events in motion, but she was no longer my concern. Instead, I was focused on a new project. The unusual clause in my contract, Section 9, had not been a random demand. I had been formulating an idea since the day I was escorted out of the building. I scheduled a lunch meeting with Maya Keller, our head of product development, to discuss a side initiative. "I need a small team for an experimental project, Maya," I told her as we sat in a quiet corner of a local restaurant. "It is separate from our financial analytics work, but it is something I want to explore under my contract's new venture clause." Maya looked intrigued, leaning forward. "What kind of project, Gavin?" "We are data analysts, not product designers." "It is about professional apparel," I explained. "I want to design a line of professional clothing for modern corporate environments. Specifically, clothing that adapts to arbitrary and shifting corporate rules." Maya laughed, thinking it was a joke, but my expression remained serious. "Gavin, are you serious? We analyze market data. We do not make clothes." "We understand market needs," I replied, "and there is a massive, unserved market of professionals who are tired of rigid, uncomfortable clothing rules. I want to create garments with hidden, flexible elements. For men, shirts with convertible collars that can transition from formal to casual, trousers with adjustable hems and stretch fabrics that maintain a tailored look, and jackets with detachable linings. Clothing that allows a professional to adapt to any dress code instantly." Maya's eyes lit up as she processed the idea. "That is actually brilliant," she admitted. We could use our data analysis tools to map the dress code policies of the top 500 corporations in the country, identifying the common denominators and building designs that satisfy them all while maximizing comfort. Within a week, Maya had quietly assembled a team of 3 developers and 2 designers. We worked during the evenings and weekends, funding the project entirely through my personal resources, though compensating Synex Analytics for the use of office space and utilities as required by my contract. We named the brand Adaptations. The core design philosophy was simple. Professional clothing should empower the wearer, not restrict them. We developed prototypes using advanced synthetic blends that resisted wrinkles, stretched comfortably, and looked indistinguishable from high-end wool and silk. Our signature feature was the adjustment system, hidden snaps and zippers that allowed a garment to change its shape and formality within seconds. During our weekly design review, Maya demonstrated a pair of the new trousers. "Look at this waistband, Gavin," she said, showing how a series of small, flat buttons were sewn into the interior lining, allowing the waist size to expand or contract by up to 2 inches without creating bunching. We also placed a hidden zipper along the inseam, allowing the hem to be raised or lowered by 3 inches. The zipper is concealed by a double flap of fabric, so even if someone is looking closely, they only see a clean, tailored hem. The designers had also created a jacket with a collar that could fold down and secure with micro-magnets, instantly transforming it from a formal suit jacket to a casual blazer. I began wearing the prototypes to the office. On Monday, I would wear a sharp charcoal gray suit. On Tuesday, I would wear the same trousers, but with the hidden hem adjusted to a slightly more casual length, paired with a collarless shirt. The transformation was subtle, but noticeable. Several managers and analysts in the office began to take notice. One afternoon, a senior analyst named Clara Boyd, who had worked at the company for 4 years, stopped me in the hallway. "Gavin, I hope you do not mind me asking, but where did you get that jacket?" "It looks incredibly comfortable, yet professional." "It is a prototype for a project I am working on," I replied, smiling. "It is designed to adapt to different office environments. We need something like that," she sighed. "The rules here are so inconsistent. Since Chloe's departure, the HR managers are still trying to enforce arbitrary standards. It makes us feel like we are being monitored rather than valued for our work." I invited her and several other employees to a series of private focus groups. The feedback was consistent. Professionals wanted high quality, comfortable clothing that allowed them to navigate the shifting expectations of corporate culture without having to buy separate wardrobes. The data confirmed my hypothesis. We had found a genuine gap in the market. To ensure our launch succeeded, we designed a comprehensive marketing campaign built around authenticity. We analyzed the cost structures of modern apparel manufacturing and established a partnership with a boutique domestic factory. By utilizing advanced knitting techniques, we reduced production waste by 30%, ensuring a high margin. My personal funding of $50,000 was sufficient to secure the first production run of 1,000 garments. The digital storefront was developed in-house, designed to integrate with modern logistics networks. After 6 months of development, Adaptations was ready for its initial launch. The day before the official launch of Adaptations, I called a company-wide meeting at Synex Analytics. The main auditorium was packed with employees, board members, and executives. Oliver Vance sat in the front row, his expression a mix of curiosity and apprehension. In the middle rows, Chloe Vance sat quietly, trying to blend into the crowd of analysts. She had spent the last several months working in near isolation, and the arrogance she once possessed seemed to have vanished. "Thank you all for coming," I began, stepping up to the microphone. "Today marks an important milestone. We have successfully renegotiated and finalized the merger with Apex Capital, stabilizing our core business and securing our financial future." A wave of applause swept through the room, led by the board members who looked visibly relieved. "But today is also about looking forward," I continued, gesturing to the projection screen behind me. "For the past 6 months, a small internal team has been working on a special project. Under Section 9 of my contract, we have developed a new brand that addresses a fundamental challenge in the modern workplace. I am proud to introduce Adaptations. the screen illuminated with the logo of the clothing line, followed by slides showing our initial designs. Murmurs of surprise and interest filled the auditorium. These are not just clothes, I explained, walking to the center of the stage. They are solutions. Every garment in the Adaptations collection is designed with hidden, adjustable elements that allow the wearer to transition from formal to casual in seconds, satisfying arbitrary corporate standards while maintaining comfort and style. I demonstrated the adjustment system on the charcoal jacket I was wearing, showing how the collar could fold away and the sleeves could adjust. The room erupted in quiet chatter. Our market research indicates a massive demand for adaptive professional wear, I said, displaying our sales projections. Adaptations will launch online tomorrow. As per my employment agreement, the brand will operate as an independent entity. Synex Analytics will hold a 40% non-voting ownership stake, which will provide a substantial passive revenue stream for this corporation. I paused, looking directly at the row where Chloe Vance was sitting. Every garment we sell will feature a tag detailing the inspiration behind the brand. It is the story of how an arbitrary corporate decision, a termination over a navy polo shirt, nearly destroyed a 5-decade-old company and sank a $4 billion merger. It is a reminder that true professional value comes from competence and dedication, not from superficial adherence to rigid rules. The auditorium went completely silent. No one looked at Chloe, but the message was unmistakable. Her arbitrary enforcement of a dress code had become the marketing foundation for a major new business. The launch of Adaptations exceeded all of our expectations. Within 48 hours, our website was overwhelmed with orders. The press seized on the unique origin story, running articles about the executive who turned a humiliating firing into a multi-million-dollar fashion revolution. One major business magazine ran a cover story titled "Fired for a Polo," how Gavin Jenkins engineered the ultimate corporate revenge. 2 weeks after the launch, Nolan Brooks gave an interview to a major financial news outlet. "I wear Adaptations shirts to all of my board meetings now," Nolan told the reporter. "It is the most practical clothing on the market, and I respect a leader who can turn an administrative error into a successful enterprise." The endorsement went viral, and our orders tripled. Within 3 months, the revenue generated by Adaptations exceeded the quarterly earnings of Synex Analytics' core financial business. The 40% stake held by Synex became the company's most valuable asset, single-handedly driving a recovery in the company's stock price on the 1-year anniversary of my return. I called another company meeting to announce that Adaptations would officially spin off into a separate, independent corporation. I also announced the creation of the Jenkins Foundation, funded by a portion of Adaptations' profits, to provide grants and legal support to professionals who had faced arbitrary discrimination in the workplace. After the meeting, as the crowd was dispersing, Chloe Vance approached me. She looked nervous, clutching her notebook to her chest. "Gavin," she said quietly, her voice barely audible, "I wanted to ask about the foundation. I saw on the website that you were offering a fellowship program for corporate development." "Yes," I replied, looking at Chloe. "The program is designed to help individuals who have experienced significant setbacks or made professional errors to rebuild their careers through mentorship and training." "Would I be eligible to apply?" she asked, looking down. "I know what I did was wrong. I have spent the last year realizing how much damage my arrogance caused. The application process is handled by an independent committee, Chloe," I replied evenly. "There is no special treatment, and your history will be evaluated alongside your current growth plan. But yes, you are eligible to apply." She nodded, a faint glimmer of hope in her eyes. "Thank you, Gavin. Thank you for giving me a chance to be defined by something other than my worst mistake." I watched her walk away. The revenge was complete, but it did not feel like a destruction. It felt like a realignment. I had not destroyed the company or the people who had wronged me. Instead, I had grown so large that my shadow now protected them, turning a moment of humiliation into a movement of empowerment.